with the visible violence of wind, scattering clouds, but with greater delicacy, as if she painted with her eyes rather than with her hands. Remedios sweeps the canvas clean and accumulates clarities on its transparent surface. In their struggle with reality, some painters violate it or cover it with signs, explode it or bury it, flay it. Remedios volatilizes it. It is not blood but light that flows through her body. She slowly paints quick apparitions. Appearances are the shadows of archetypes. Remedios does not invent. She remembers, except that these appearances resemble nothing and no one. See voyages within a precious stone, a speculative painting, a mirror image painting, not the world in reverse, but the reverse of the world. The art of levitation, the loss of gravity, the loss of seriousness. Remedios laughs, but her laughter echoes in another world. Space is not an expense, but a magnet attracting apparitions. A woman's hair, the strings of a harp, the sun's rays streaming down, the strings of a guitar, the world seen as music. Listen to Remedios' lines. The secret theme of her work: harmony, lost parity. In appearance, she paints disappearance. Roots, fronts, astral rays, locks of hair, flowing beards, spirals of sound, threads of death, threads of life, threads of time. The weft is woven and unwoven, unreal what we call life, unreal what we call death. Only the canvas is real. Remedios Antimoira. She does not paint time, but the moments when time is resting. In her world of stopped clocks, we hear the flow of substances, the circulation of shadow and light, time ripening. Forms seek their own form, form seeks its own dissolution. Octavio Paz, Appearances and Disappearances of Remedios Varo, written in 1967. Hello friends, welcome to Inclusive Art Podcast, Arte Inclusiva Podcast, a bilingual podcast where I tell you a little bit about the life of women artists. Thank you so much if you have been listening and if you have been sharing. I really appreciate it. I would just like to say I'm very thankful for every person that has been following me on social media and commenting on the podcast. So without anything further, I would just like to start with the life of amazing artist Remedios Varo. María de los Remedios Varo y Uranga, Catalan painter, was born on December 16, 1908 in Anglès in Catalonia. Her father, Rodrigo Varo y Cejalvo, was a hydraulic engineer, and her mother, Ignacia Uranga y Vergareche, was of Spanish and Argentine ascent, a traditional family mother. Remedios had two brothers. The eldest, Rodrigo, was a doctor, while the youngest, Luis, died very young in 1936 during the Spanish Civil War. Remedios was a replacement child, meaning that her parents lost a daughter before she was born, and they named her Remedios in honor of Our Lady of Remedies, and because she was a remedy for this loss suffered by her parents. And by the way, Salvador Dali and Vincent van Gogh were also replacement children, and there is a very interesting article about it on identity, and I will leave the information in the episode notes. Unfortunately, it's not about Remedios Varo, but if you're interested, you can check it out. As a child, Remedios traveled a lot with her family due to her father's work, visiting places in Morocco and Spain, which is later reflected in her artworks. As a teenager, she often visited the Prado Museum and observed artists such as Giorgio da Chirico, Jerónimos Bosch, El Greco, and Goya, who became her influences. In 1924, she entered the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando, the alma mater of artists such as Salvador Dali, Rafael Alberti, Josep Luis Florit, etc. The intellectual environment of Madrid in the 1920s was developing, and the influence of French surrealism permeated Madrid during these years, making a great impression on the young artist. Her rebellious spirit and her desire to leave her Catholic home led her to marry Gerardo Lizárraga at the age of 21, whom she met while studying at the San Fernando Academy. In 1931, seeing the instability of Spain and prior to the Civil War, Varo and Lizárraga moved to Paris. After a year in Paris, they moved to Barcelona, where they were able to continue in contact with the artistic movements of Paris and speak their own language. While she was still married to Lizárraga, Varo met Esteban Francés, a younger surrealist who became her lover. She and Francés often played the surreal game Exquisite Corpse, a game in which each participant takes turns drawing on a sheet of paper, folding it to conceal their contribution, and then passing it to the next person for a further contribution, and so on. It's a fun game that you can try at home. Her marriage to Lizárraga lasted 6 years, but they remained friends until the end of her life. In 1936, while in Barcelona, Varo met Benjamin Peret through friend and artist Oscar Domínguez. Peret, poet and close friend of André Breton, was nicknamed the Inquisitor of Surrealism. While Varo was still married to Lizárraga and involved with Francés, they became a couple. In the rather patriarchal surrealist circle, women often existed only as role models or friends. They played the role of muses and participated in the collective activities of the group indirectly, while the main role of the artist was played by men. Varo knew this manly world and intervened with insecurities and fears. Peret made her his muse, but in a way that her reaction was of astonishment. She was drawn to his intellect, and she felt included. Peret was part of the anti-fascist movement, and when the Civil War started, they had to move to Paris. She would never return to Spain because Generalissimo Franco forbade the entry of people with a Republican passport, like the one Varo had. That same year, her younger brother died in Franco's army. As one friend of hers pointed out, she spoke of the bitter shock of her brother, her beloved playmate, taking the side of the enemy and dying at such a young age. Here it is important to mention these displacement details. First, Remedios left home very, very young. Then she moved to Paris. Then she moved to Barcelona. Because of the war, she returned to Paris, and then she will have to flee to escape World War II to get to Mexico. In my opinion, all these movements are reflected in her works as symbolic passages, doors, and windows. If you look at her early paintings and drawings, you will see that they are loaded with anxiety, with symbols that reflect her subconscious, perhaps the guilt of leaving home, the sadness of losing her brother, the anxiety of having to flee from one place to another because of those two wars. But before leaving Paris for Mexico in 1938, Varo met the core of surrealist artists in Paris. Peret, Domínguez, Yves Tanguy, Victor Vrauner, a Romanian artist, were among her colleagues and friends. Vrauner became a great influence on her work and was also her lover. In June of 1940, after the Nazi invasion, with Perret in prison for his ties to communism, Varo fled Paris with the help of the surrealist artist Jacques Hérold, and in August, she arrived in Marseille, where a group of artists whom Perret joined were fixing their escape. While this was happening, Varo had a lot of anxiety because Perret was in jail, so when he finally joined her in Marseille, that was a relief. And while they were waiting for their travel documents, Varo and Perret lived near the Villa Abbeville, where members of the group of Parisian surrealists lived, including André Breton, Victor Serge, Victor Bronner, Oscar Dominguez, Jacques Hérold, Wilfredo Lam, and Berrien Fry. The decision to seek refuge in Mexico was because of Perret's political past, who was denied access to the US. Also, the current Mexican president Lázaro Cárdenas had recently offered protection to Spanish refugees and members of the International Brigade, which was convenient for Varo. With help from New York from André Breton, Alfred Barr, the director of the Museum of Modern Art, and the money of Peggy Guggenheim, a socialite and art collector, they arrived in Mexico by the end of 1941. Varo and Perret found many of their other friends there in Mexico. Gerardo Lizárraga, Esteban Francés, Gunter Gerso, Katy and Jose Horna, Emerico Chiqui Weiss, and Leonora Carrington. A small intimate group that she frequented until the end of her life. The collective also included Luis Buñuel, César Moro, Wolfgang Palen, and among others, Alice Rajon, who also gathered in Varo and Perret's home at Calle Gabino Barreda in Mexico City. Varo was soon aware that local artists such as Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera rejected the influx of Europeans, and thus did not feel welcomed or inclined to be involved with the Mexican artists. Varo's European group developed a connection among exiled artists, creating a provisional community in a foreign land. Her curiosity was endless, and she was always reading and trying to learn about psychoanalysis, mathematics, exact sciences, chemistry, theories of alchemy, magic, and so on. She soon became friends with Leonora Carrington and Katy Horna, and together they were exploring alchemy and art, sharing science and knowledge. They made potions together and shared secrets, and were often called the Three Witches. Alchemical witches, bohemian artists. What a beautiful life they found. Soon after her arrival in 1942, Varo exhibited her works at Galería de Arte Mexicana, organized by Wolfgang Palen and César Moro. In the late 40s, she worked for Casa Bayer, a pharmaceutical company that hired her to create drawings for their advertisements. In 1947, she broke her relationship with Perret, who returned to France. Her exploration of surrealist ideas and symbols, along with others inspired by her wide-ranging reading of alchemy, magic, and psychoanalysis, remained a primary characteristic of her works, as she was later embraced as one of the surrealists, even though she often mentioned that she did not feel she was a surrealist. In 1947, Varo began a new relationship with a young French pilot, Jean Nicole, 16 years her junior, with whom she lived for 2 years. Despite her dislike for traveling, they went to Venezuela together and stayed there for 2 years, drawing technical drawings for the Ministry of Public Health, a task that invited her to study and analyze the microscopic world of diseases and parasites, which provided her of a connection with nature, a biomorphic style that she incorporated into her paintings. While in Venezuela, she also took a trip to the Orinoco River, hence the inspiration for her work, exploration of the sources of the Orinoco River that she painted until 1959. Upon returning to Mexico in 1949, she and Walter Gruen became a couple with whom she would stay for the rest of her life. Gruen provided her with financial security and artistic freedom to finally dedicate her whole life to art. And from the moment she began to dedicate her time alone to her artistic career in 1952, Varo acquired a maturity that leads to her signature style and became easily recognizable. Her transformation began here, when there were no more displacements, when she found a home in Mexico. In Janet Kaplan's book, Unexpected Journeys, there is a quote where Remedios talks about how she felt. "I came to Mexico searching for peace. In this country, I have found the tranquility that I have always searched for. I am more from Mexico than from any other place. I know little of Spain. I was very young when I lived there. Then I lived the years of apprenticeship, of assimilation in Paris. Then the war. It is in Mexico where I feel welcomed and secure." In 1955, Varo participated in a collective exhibition, Seis Pintoras, 6 women painters, at the Galeria Diana, with Leonora Carrington, Alice Rajon, Cordelia Urueta, Elvira Gascon, and Solange de Forge. And I don't want to spend too much time on each painting and art exhibit because her work is very, very broad. But it is important to mention that, in my opinion, after she acquired her artistic maturity, there are a series of elements that are usually found in her paintings. Number 1. There is usually only one central character with androgynous qualities. This is not a coincidence because she studied Carl Jung, for whom individuation is a process by which a person becomes a psychological individual, a separate unit or indivisible whole, recognizing their most intimate uniqueness. For Arturo Schwarz, scholar and art historian, this state is reached when, as humans, we find a balance of our own elements, referring to the alchemist who seeks the philosopher's stone, the balance of night and day, the feminine and the masculine, good and evil, and that in many civilizations it is represented by the androgen. And when that balance is achieved, then a person can create art. Varo knew Jung's theories and read about alchemists, and it is reflected as evidence in her work. Number 2. Passageways, doors, and windows. They reflect, in my opinion, the displacements that occurred during her life, and the passages to other worlds, to other realities, not necessarily fantastic, but also physical, possibly quantum-related, the passages to things that we as humans do not yet know, but we will discover in the future, as there are scientific and universal answers that are waiting to be discovered. Number 3. Obviously, the surreal aspect. There's going to be something that does not belong to reality, but more to the world of dreams. Number 4. Esoteric or symbolic aspects, such as the chalice in exploring the sources of the Orinoco River, from which the entire river comes from. The labyrinth in the chest of the mannequin in Dead Leaves, or the alchemical instruments in Creation of the Birds of 1957. The presence of the constellation of Cancer in Portrait of Dr. Ignacio Chavez of 1957, since she herself comments, "This is a painting that I did for Dr. Chavez. The person in the crystalloid cave is the doctor himself. I used his most distinctive features, but it was not my intention to paint a real portrait. I dress him in a somewhat priestly garb to suggest that his profession is perhaps a kind of priesthood. He has a key in his hand. People who approach him for the rabbin have a small door in place of the heart, and the doctor winds them up as they pass. These characters are very unreal, rather like puppets, and move by means of strings attached to wheels on their elbows, knees, and ankles, and to the stars in the constellation Cancer. According to the ancient books of physiology, that is, according to the ones I consulted, this constellation governs diseases and matters related to the heart. Once you think of these elements, once again, androgynous characters, passages and doors, fantastic worlds, symbols, go check out her paintings. Some of the most famous ones are The Dead Leaves or The Dead Hours of 1956, The Pied Piper, 1955, Harmony, 1956, Exploration of the Sources of the Orinoco River, 1959, Born Again, 1960, Creation of the Birds, 1957, The Juggler, 1956, The Call, 1961, Woman Living the Psychoanalyst, 1960, Spiral Transit, 1962, and the trilogy of Towards the Tower, Embroidering Earth's Mantle, and The Flight, 1960 to 1961. Of course, there are more, so when you finish listening, you can go and check the link I left to see her artworks. Her last painting, Still Life Reviving, painted in 1963, is also considered a premonition of her sudden death. Kaplan says, Varo's Still Life Reviving seems a prophetic form of preparation for the passage into death. By adapting the tradition of still life to her more cosmic purpose, she created an image that fulfilled the philosophical and spiritual principles so central to her thinking. Neither somber nor finite, it is an image that celebrates the cyclical forces of nature, the evolutionary spiral, and the continuity of eternal return. The painting does not have human figures, which is not common in her work, but still her mystical hand and a sense of magical revere are present. Varo implies that the movement of the fruits that make up the still life is a kind of resurrection. The 13 fruits resemble the solar system and recall the celestial powers that orbit around the chandelier that represents the sun in a whirlwind produced by an invisible source of energy. A natural and universal cyclical rebirth, according to Kaplan. 2 pomegranates collide and destroy each other, a symbol of the breakdown of routine, and 8 plates move by the synergy caused by the motion from the system above, while 4 dragonflies fly on top of everything. Varo can be identified with these dragonflies. In 1961, just 2 years earlier, she painted a sort of self-portrait that depicted her as a hybrid being, a dragonfly woman. It's actually called Dragonfly Woman if you want to take a look at it. In Still Life Reviving, a dragonfly flies into a window passage at the back of the painting, an arched doorway, a crossing to a different place, as a symbol of transformation and transcendence. Kaplan says that life is continuity. It is renewed and cyclical like the archetypes of our psyche and like our desire to succeed. To Carl Jung, we are equal in our human core, the collective unconscious. We share joys and fears. We experience and embrace the positive and the negative, the challenges of the natural process of life with our conscious and unconscious particularities. With our common core similarities, each of us goes through the developmental passages, hoping for immortality. Varo died shortly after completing this work. She had a heart attack on October 8, 1963. Her influence on later generations of artists is subtle but present. She is on the rise, as well as her prices at auctions and her presence in museums and galleries. Her painting, Towards the Tower, sold for $4.3 million in 2014. And in 2020, Harmony, or Suggestive Self-Portrait, surpassed by far the estimated $3 million when it sold for $6.1 million at Sotheby's, beating her own auction sale record. In this sense, the significance of her art will increase and prevail. Artist above all, but also alchemist, witch, feminist. Varo wanted to understand the secrets of the universe and follow her path towards enlightenment through her art. She went through deep passages of consciousness, underwent transformation, and portrayed her maturity in her works, indicating that she found the path towards transcendence. I could talk for hours and hours about her works and how fascinating each one of them is. But instead, I leave you with a poem that Rosario Castellanos wrote after her death in December 1963. Being born to live limitless like the river that is thrown down, drags strange matters, precipitates its flow to the end without seeing the sky, neither the tree of the margins, nor to polish with love the stone of its core. Thus to our living we call vertigo, whirlwind that at times devours, seaweed that entangles what wants to ascend to the surface. And there is not, between the roar and its extinction, more than the turbidity of the slime, the dark fish, and the pulse without rest. Thus all of us who have ended in the sea before making a name. Thus all, not she. Made also of water, thoughtfully she stopped in deep still pools. What figures she leaves us to make out its transparency. Galleries without end, desolate palaces, complex machineries where the universe was transformed in beauty and in order and in resplendent law. Woman, she spun flakes of light. She wove nets to catch the stars. Woman, she had her masks and played to be deceived and to deceive others. But when she contemplated her true face, it was a flower of petals, pale and wilted. Love, absence, death. And in her corolla there was some scar almost erased. For everything she knew, she was obedient and sad, and when she left through that street, which she knew so well, of goodbyes, creatures of beauty went to say their farewells. Those she rescued from chaos, from the shadows, from contradictions, and made them live in the magical atmosphere created by her breath. Metamorphosis of the Witch by Rosario Castellanos. It is important that I mention that I did not talk about many things, but I leave some recommendations in the episode notes. There are also documentaries available on YouTube where they interview people who live with her and comment about her life. And thankfully there's many books too that you can check out. I must confess that she is my favorite artist, and I wrote my master's thesis about her that talks about displacement, transformation, and transcendence. So if anyone is interested in knowing a little more or want to share some information with me, please do so. I will be super happy to learn more about her or to share more things with you. Thank you very much for listening to the biography of the wonderful Remedios Varo. This bilingual podcast is produced by me, Rebecca Navarro. If you like it, please subscribe on your platform of preference. You can comment, rate it, and share it. You can also follow Arte Inclusivo, Inclusive Art, on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email me at arteinclusivopodcast@gmail.com. I am leaving all the links below for reference. Thanks again for listening, and let's make exclusive art inclusive.